The wine splashed crimson across his cuff like a warning written in blood. Ariavale's hands trembled as every eye in the underground club turned toward her, and toward Dante Moretti, the man whose name made grown criminals whisper prayers. He didn't shout, he didn't move. He simply smiled, and that smile promised consequences far worse than anger. Then he spoke. "Dance for me, and I'll forgive you." But Aria, a waitress drowning in debt and desperation, did something no one had ever dared. She looked into the eyes of Chicago's most dangerous man and raised the stakes to marriage. If you want to see how a single dance can rewrite a life, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Velvet Cage wasn't the kind of place you found by accident. Tucked 3 stories beneath Michigan Avenue, accessible only through a nondescript service entrance behind a shuttered dry cleaner, it catered to Chicago's elite, the kind who measured wealth in influence rather than dollars, and whose handshakes sealed fates instead of deals. The decor spoke of old money and older sins. Marble floors imported from Carrara, chandeliers dripping Austrian crystal, leather boots the color of dried blood. Jazz drifted through the air like expensive perfume played by musicians who knew better than to make eye contact with the clientele. Aria Vale had been working at the Velvet Cage for exactly 3 weeks, and she still couldn't believe they'd hired her. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her server's uniform, black dress, white apron, sensible shoes, making her nearly invisible among the opulence. That invisibility was intentional. The Velvet Cage didn't want memorable servers. They wanted ghosts who delivered $1,000 bottles of wine and then disappeared before the conversations turned dangerous. Aria had perfected the art of disappearing long before she'd found this job. At 26, she'd already mastered the particular kind of invisibility that came from being broke in a city that worshipped money, beautiful in a way that attracted the wrong kind of attention, and smart enough to know that survival meant keeping her head down and her mouth shut. Tonight, the club was fuller than usual. Something important was happening. She could feel it in the tension that crackled through the room like static electricity before a storm. The regulars, the traders and lawyers and real estate moguls who usually dominated the space, had been relegated to the outer tables. The prime booths, the ones arranged in a semicircle around the small dance floor, were occupied by a different breed entirely. These men wore their power like a second skin. They didn't need to raise their voices or flash their wealth. They simply existed, and the world rearranged itself around them. "Table 7 needs another bottle of the Chateau Margaux," her manager Marcus muttered as he breezed past her with a tray of empty glasses. "The 2009, and for the love of everything holy, don't screw this up." Aria's stomach clenched. Table 7. She'd been avoiding even looking in that direction all night, but now she had no choice. The booth sat elevated on a small platform, giving its occupants a perfect view of the entire club. 6 men occupied the curved leather bench, but only one mattered. He sat at the center like a king holding court, his presence so commanding that Aria felt it before she even saw his face. Dante Moretti. She'd heard the name whispered in the staff room, always accompanied by warnings and wide eyes. He owned half the South Side and controlled the other half through sheer force of will. Politicians sought his endorsement. Businessmen paid him tribute disguised as consulting fees. And his enemies, well, his enemies had a habit of disappearing into the Chicago River with concrete shoes and final regrets. He was 34, unmarried, and according to the rumors, utterly untouchable. Not because he was cruel, though he could be, but because he operated by a code so absolute that it bordered on medieval. His word was law, his promises were binding, and his vengeance was legendary. Aria retrieved the bottle from the climate-controlled wine cellar behind the bar, handling it with the reverence it deserved. $3,000 for a single bottle, more than she made in 2 months. The weight of it in her hands felt obscene. She approached table 7 with her eyes lowered, the way Marcus had taught her. Don't stare. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist any more than absolutely necessary. The men were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. As she drew closer, fragments of dialogue reached her ears. "Shipment arrives Wednesday. We need guarantees. The Calabrese family is making noise about territories. Respect or bullets, and I'm fresh out of patience." Dante's voice cut through the others like a blade through silk. Respect is earned through consistency, not volume. He spoke quietly, but every man at the table fell silent. We honor our agreements. We protect our interests. And we remind our competitors that there are consequences for disrespect. Arya reached the table and began the delicate process of opening the wine. Her hands were steady. Years of ballet training had given her that much, at least. The muscle memory of perfect control, of making difficult things look effortless. She'd been a dancer once, a good one. Good enough for a full scholarship to Juilliard, good enough to dream of stages and spotlights and a life built on art instead of survival. Then her mother got sick and dreams became luxuries she couldn't afford. She'd come home to Chicago, worked 3 jobs to pay for treatments that ultimately failed, and emerged on the other side with a mountain of medical debt and hands that still remembered how to make beauty even when everything else had fallen apart. The cork came free with a soft pop. Arya poured a small amount into Dante's glass for approval, keeping her eyes on the wine, on the way it caught the light like liquid rubies. "That's fine," he said without tasting it. She began pouring for the other men, working her way around the table. Their conversation resumed, voices layering over each other in a complex symphony of business and threat. She was almost finished, almost safe. The last glass belonged to a heavy-set man on Dante's right, a silver-haired enforcer type whose knuckles bore the scars of a violent career. As Arya leaned in to pour, another server rushed past behind her, too close, too fast. The collision was minor, just a brush of shoulders, but it was enough. Arya stumbled forward, her hand jerked, and $3,000 worth of wine arced through the air in a perfect crimson spray, splashing across Dante Moretti's left wrist and the pristine white cuff of his custom shirt. The entire club seemed to freeze. The jazz quartet faltered, notes dying mid-phrase. Conversation stopped. Every person in the room turned to watch what would happen next. Arya's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The empty bottle slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. She forced herself to meet Dante's eyes, expecting rage, expecting violence. Instead, she found curiosity. Dante Moretti was looking at her as if she'd just done something interesting rather than catastrophic. He lifted his stained wrist, examining the wine-soaked fabric with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. "Well," he said softly, "that's unfortunate." His men shifted, hands moving toward concealed weapons, faces hardening with anticipated violence. But Dante raised his clean hand in a gesture that froze them mid-motion. "Do you know what this shirt cost?" he asked Arya, his tone almost conversational. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Neither do I." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever seen, not because it was cruel, but because it was genuine. "My tailor makes them, brings me a new one each month. I've never asked the price because the number is irrelevant." He stood, and Arya took an involuntary step backward. He was taller than she'd expected, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that made the expensive suit seem like an afterthought. Dark hair, darker eyes, and features that would have been handsome if they weren't so ruthlessly composed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Arya. Arya Vale." Arya. He tasted the name like wine. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir." "Then you understand the position you're in." He gestured to the ruined shirt, the shattered bottle, the wine pooling on the floor like evidence at a crime scene. "This wasn't an accident born of carelessness. You were jostled. I saw it happen. But in my world, Arya Vale, intentions matter less than outcomes." The club remained frozen, every patron holding their breath, waiting to see if they were about to witness a murder. "You owe me a debt," Dante continued, "not for the wine or the shirt. Those are nothing, but for the disruption, for interrupting my evening, my business, my very expensive conversation." He glanced at his men who watched Arya like wolves eyeing wounded prey. In front of witnesses. Arya's mind raced. She had maybe $300 in her bank account. Her rent was due in a week. She was already behind on her mother's final medical bills, already drowning in interest payments and collection notices. "I don't have money," she said, the words bitter as poison. "I can offer you. I can work. Extra shifts. I'll pay it back, whatever it takes." "Work," Dante's smile widened. I have hundreds of people who work for me. I don't need another server, Arya Vale. One of his men leaned in, whispering something Arya couldn't hear. Dante's expression shifted, considering. My associate suggests a traditional solution, Dante said. A physical reminder of the importance of paying debts. Broken fingers, perhaps. Or a scar. Something that would make you remember this moment every time you picked up a wine bottle. Arya felt the blood drain from her face. But I find that solution unimaginative. Dante walked to the edge of the dance floor, his shoes clicking against marble. The band had abandoned their instruments, fleeing to the safety of the shadows. He turned back to face her, backlit by the chandelier, looking every inch the dangerous legend the whispers claimed him to be. You said your name is Arya. A musical term. Tell me, can you dance? The question was so unexpected that Arya almost laughed. What? Dance, he gestured to the empty floor. Can you? I used to. Ballet. Modern. Some jazz, but I don't. Perfect. Dante's voice carried across the silent room. Then here are my terms. You will dance for me, right now. A waltz, performed solo on this floor. If you dance well, if you dance flawlessly, I will forgive your debt entirely. The wine, the shirt, the disruption. All of it, forgotten. He paused, letting the offer sink in. If you dance poorly, if you stumble or falter or fail to impress me. His shrug was elegant, almost apologetic. Then we returned to my associate's suggestion about fingers and scars. The room erupted in murmurs. This was unexpected entertainment, the kind of capricious cruelty that would be retold in whispers for months. Arya stared at the marble floor, at the wine still pooling near table 7, at the shattered glass glinting like broken promises. A solo waltz. She'd trained for years, had performed in recitals and competitions, had once believed she was good enough for Lincoln Center, but that was before. Before her mother's illness, before the debt, before the years of working double shifts had stolen her practice time and her confidence. She looked back at Dante, at the men surrounding him, at the entire club full of predators waiting to watch her fail. No, she said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Dante's eyebrows rose. No? I won't dance for your amusement. Arya's voice was stronger now, fueled by the reckless courage of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. You want to break my fingers? Go ahead. I'll heal, but I won't perform like a trained monkey for your entertainment. One of Dante's men stood, fury darkening his face. You ungrateful... Dante silenced him with a look. When he turned back to Arya, something new flickered in his expression. Interest. Real interest. Principles, he said softly. How refreshing. Very well, Arya Vale. Name your price. What would make this worth your dignity? The words came before she could stop them, before sanity could intervene, before fear could silence the wild, desperate part of her that had watched too many people push her around, take from her, reduce her to nothing. If I dance perfectly, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, you marry me. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly, laughter began to build. It started with Dante's men and spread through the club like wildfire. Customers at distant tables joined in, the absurdity of it too perfect, too ridiculous. A waitress in a stained apron demanding marriage from Chicago's most powerful crime boss in exchange for a dance. But Dante didn't laugh. He studied her with those dark, calculating eyes, and Arya saw the exact moment he decided to call what he assumed was a bluff. Marriage, he said. A legal marriage, binding and legitimate. Yes. And if you fail to dance perfectly, then I accept whatever punishment you choose. Dante walked toward her, closing the distance until they stood barely a foot apart. Up close, she could see the fine details. The faint scar along his jawline, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the way his eyes seemed to catalog everything about her in a single glance. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. I genuinely cannot tell which. Does it matter? Not really. He stepped back, addressing the room. You all heard her terms. I accept. The laughter died immediately. This was no longer a joke. Dante Moretti never broke his word, and he'd just accepted a wager in front of 50 witnesses. "Someone get the band back here," Dante ordered. "I want a waltz. Something classical. Strauss, perhaps." The musicians returned to their instruments with shaking hands. The pianist shuffled through sheet music while the others tuned up, the scattered notes discordant and nervous. Marcus appeared at Aria's elbow, his face ashen. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "He'll kill you, or worse." "I know what I'm doing," Aria lied. She didn't. She had no idea what she was doing, but she knew what she couldn't do anymore. She couldn't be invisible, couldn't be pushed around, couldn't watch her life slip away in an endless cycle of debt and degradation. If she was going to fall, she'd fall spectacularly. Dante returned to his booth, settling into his seat like a king on a throne. His men arranged themselves around him, their expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. The rest of the club's patrons shifted for better views, wolves gathering for a kill. "Whenever you're ready," Dante called out. Aria walked to the center of the dance floor, her cheap shoes clicking against marble. She stood in the exact middle, where the overhead chandelier cast a perfect circle of light. She'd danced alone before, countless times. Solo performances were part of training, part of proving yourself. But those had been in studios, in theaters, with friendly audiences or empty rooms. This was different. This was dancing for her life. The music began. Strauss's Blue Danube, the most famous waltz ever written. The pianist's hands trembled slightly on the keys, but the melody emerged clean and true. Aria closed her eyes and let the first 8 counts pass. She needed to feel the music, to let it sink into her bones, to remember what it felt like when dance had been joy instead of transaction. Then she began to move. Years fell away. The debt, the grief, the endless grind of survival, all of it dissolved as her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She was trained for this, built for this. And even though she'd been away from daily practice, muscle memory was a powerful thing. She started with the basic waltz step, but even in its simplicity, there was precision. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin lifted, core engaged. She moved through the 1-2-3 rhythm with the kind of control that looked effortless but required absolute mastery. Then she began to expand. Without a partner, she had to dance both parts, her arms positioned as if holding an invisible companion. She swept across the marble in broad circles, her movements growing larger, more confident. The cheap uniform dress became irrelevant. The lack of proper dance shoes didn't matter. She was no longer a waitress drowning in debt. She was a dancer. And she was fucking magnificent. Aria incorporated turns, her spotting technique flawless as she rotated across the floor. She added arabesques, extending her leg in perfect lines that would have made her instructors weep. She flowed between classical waltz and modern interpretation, making the dance her own, telling a story without words, the story of a girl who'd lost everything but refused to break. She could feel the room's energy shifting. The laughter had died completely. Even the men who'd been most eager to see her fail were leaning forward, transfixed. But Aria wasn't dancing for them. She was dancing for herself. For the girl who'd given up Juilliard without complaint. For the daughter who'd worked herself to exhaustion for treatments that failed anyway. For every moment of invisibility, every time she'd swallowed her pride, every dream she'd sacrificed on the altar of survival. The music built toward its crescendo, and Aria built with it. She executed a series of fouettés, those impossibly difficult turns that required perfect balance and absolute control. 1, 2, 3, 4. She nailed them all, her supporting leg rock steady, her working leg whipping around with precision. For the finale, she returned to the center of the floor. As the last notes played, she executed a perfect arabesque penché, leaning forward until her torso was parallel to the ground, her back leg extended high behind her, her arms spread like wings. She held the position for a breathless moment, then slowly rose as the music faded. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock or anticipation. This was awe. Aria opened her eyes and found herself facing Dante's booth. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, his expression unreadable. She'd done it. She knew she'd done it. The dance had been flawless, not perfect, because nothing was perfect, but as close as a human body could achieve without months of daily practice. Dante stood slowly. He walked to the edge of the dance floor, his eyes never leaving hers. Well, he said quietly, that was unexpected. Do you honor your agreements, Mr. Moretti? Arya asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Always. He turned to one of his men. Vincent, we need a judge. A real one, not one of our usual accommodators. Someone whose license is legitimate. Vincent pulled out his phone, already making calls. Dante looked back at Arya. You realize what you've done. I've won a wager. You've changed your life. His expression was hard to read. I hope you understand the difference. I understand that I'm tired of being powerless, Arya said. I understand that I'd rather gamble on something crazy than spend the rest of my life drowning slowly. Crazy. Dante's laugh was short, humorless. That's certainly one word for it. Things moved quickly after that. Vincent returned within 20 minutes with Judge Patricia Chen, a stern woman in her 60s who looked deeply unhappy about being summoned to an underground club at midnight. But when she saw who'd called her, her expression shifted to resigned compliance. You want to get married, Judge Chen said flatly, looking between Dante and Arya. Right now. Here. That's correct, Dante said. And this is consensual, legal, not coerced? I made a wager, Dante explained. She won. These are the terms we both agreed to, in front of all these witnesses. Judge Chen's eyes narrowed. A wager. He bet I couldn't dance, Arya said. I bet I could. We both knew the stakes. This is insane. Nevertheless, Dante said quietly, and the judge heard the steel beneath the courtesy. Judge Chen sighed and pulled the necessary papers from her bag. I'll need identification from both of you, and 2 witnesses. The next hour passed in a blur. Arya's driver's license was retrieved from her locker in the staff room. Dante's appeared from somewhere in his jacket. 2 of his men, Vincent and another enforcer named Carlo, served as witnesses, their faces carefully neutral. They stood on the dance floor where Arya had just performed, under the chandelier's golden light, surrounded by an audience that couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. Judge Chen ran through the ceremony with mechanical efficiency, her voice drained of any warmth or romance. Do you, Dante Moretti, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Arya Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Arya looked at Dante, at this dangerous stranger she was binding herself to, based on a moment of reckless pride. She thought about her empty apartment, her crushing debt, her life of invisible servitude. She thought about the dance she'd just performed and how alive she'd felt for those 3 minutes. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Chen snapped her folder shut. Sign here, here, and here. Witnesses, you too. They signed. The papers were notarized. And just like that, Arya Vale became Arya Moretti. Judge Chen left quickly, clearly wanting no part of whatever happened next. The club remained silent, everyone waiting to see how this impossible situation would resolve. Dante turned to his men. We're leaving. Vincent, bring the car around. Carlo, make sure the staff understands that what happened here tonight stays here, permanently. He looked at Arya. Get your things. You're coming with me. Where? She asked. Home. Our home. You're my wife now. His expression was unreadable. That means you live where I live. You exist in my world. And my world has rules you'll need to learn very quickly if you want to survive it. Arya went to collect her jacket and purse from the staff room, her mind reeling. Marcus cornered her at her locker. What have you done? He whispered urgently. Do you know what he is? What he does? I know enough. You don't know anything. Dante Moretti doesn't do anything without a reason. There's an angle here. There's always an angle. Arya had wondered the same thing during the ceremony. Why had he accepted her terms? A man like Dante could have laughed off her proposal, could have forced her to dance without any reward, but he'd agreed immediately, as if her outrageous demand had been exactly what he'd wanted. Maybe, she said slowly, I gave him something he needed. What could he possibly need from you? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. She left the staff room and found Dante waiting by the club's entrance. He'd put on a coat covering the wine-stained shirt. His men surrounded him in a protective formation that spoke of long practice and serious threats. Ready? He asked. Arya thought about the question. Was she ready to step into a world of violence and power? To become the wife of a crime boss? To abandon everything familiar for a leap into the unknown? No, she said honestly. But let's go anyway. The night air hit her like a physical force as they emerged from the club. 3 black SUVs waited at the curb, engines running, windows tinted to opacity. Dante guided her to the middle vehicle with a hand on the small of her back, proprietary, protective. The interior was leather and luxury, the kind of car that costs more than most people's houses. As they pulled away from the curb, Arya watched the city blur past the windows, familiar streets suddenly looking foreign and strange. "You'll stay in the East Wing initially," Dante said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Separate quarters. Despite the legality of our marriage, we're still strangers. I don't expect intimacy. Not until or unless we both want it." "Thank you," Arya said, surprised by the consideration. "Don't thank me yet." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You walked into my world tonight, Arya, not because you wanted to, but because you were desperate and reckless and brave. But now you're here, and you need to understand what that means. Tell me." "I have enemies, powerful ones. They've been waiting for me to show weakness, to give them an opening." His smile was cold. "Marriage to you. A civilian, a nobody, someone they'll perceive as a liability. That's going to make them bold. They'll think I've lost my edge, that love or sentiment has made me vulnerable." "Have you?" "I don't know you well enough to love you, and I'm never vulnerable." He held her gaze. "But they'll believe I am, and they'll move against me, against us." Arya felt ice slide down her spine. "So I'm bait." "You're a catalyst. There's a difference." Dante settled back against the leather seats. "My world has been in a state of careful tension for years. Alliances, territories, agreements, all of it balanced on a knife's edge. Your presence tips that balance, forces my enemies to act before they're fully prepared. And when they do, we'll be ready, and we'll end this Cold War once and for all." His expression softened slightly. "But make no mistake, the danger is real. Starting tomorrow, you'll have bodyguards. You'll learn to shoot, to fight, to recognize threats. You'll become fluent in the language of survival." The SUV turned onto Lakeshore Drive, the water black and restless beyond the windows. In the distance, Arya could see a massive estate rising from the shoreline, all glass and steel and fortified walls. "What if I can't do this?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Dante looked at her for a long moment. "You danced a flawless waltz under threat of mutilation in front of 50 hostile strangers. You demanded marriage from the most dangerous man in Chicago and never flinched." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Trust me, Arya, you're strong enough." The SUV passed through security gates that looked like they could withstand a tank assault. The estate sprawled before them, a testament to wealth and paranoia in equal measure. Lights blazed from every window, and Arya could see armed guards patrolling the grounds. This was her life now, this fortress, this danger, this impossible gamble. The car stopped at the front entrance. Dante climbed out and offered her his hand. Arya hesitated for just a moment, then took it. His grip was warm, steady, and absolutely certain. Together, they walked into the fortress that would become either her salvation or her tomb. The east wing of Dante's estate was larger than any apartment Arya had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the water stretching endlessly toward a horizon that was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The bedroom alone could have fit her entire previous apartment twice over, decorated in shades of cream and silver that spoke of professional designers and unlimited budgets. A woman in her 50s waited inside, her posture military straight, her expression carefully neutral. She wore a simple black dress and sensible shoes, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "This is Elena," Dante said. "She manages the household staff and will help you adjust. Anything you need, ask her." Elena nodded once, her eyes assessing Arya with the cool efficiency of someone who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "Your clothes are already being handled," Elena said, her accent faintly Eastern European. "We took your measurements from the uniform. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll have a complete wardrobe. Until then, there are basics in the closet." Arya opened her mouth to protest the presumption, then closed it again. Of course, they'd taken her measurements. Dante's people had probably photographed her, run background checks, and compiled a complete dossier before she'd even finished signing the marriage certificate. "Get some rest," Dante said from the doorway. "We'll talk more tomorrow. Or rather, later today." He checked his watch. "I have some business to handle. Elena will show you around when you wake up." He left without waiting for a response, his footsteps fading down the marble hallway. Arya stood in the center of the enormous bedroom, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the dance, the wedding, the surreal drive to this fortress, all of it was draining away, leaving her hollowed out and shaking. "The bathroom is through there," Elena said, gesturing to a door Arya hadn't noticed. "Fresh towels, toiletries, everything you need. There's a panic button by the bed if you require assistance during the night." "Panic button?" "This is a secure facility, Mrs. Moretti, but security works both ways. If you feel threatened, if you need help, you press that button and armed guards will be here in 30 seconds. The casual mention of armed response to bedroom emergencies drove home just how completely her reality had shifted. 12 hours ago, her biggest worry had been making rent. Now she was sleeping in a fortress with panic buttons and guards who carried guns. Elena moved toward the door, then paused. "A word of advice, if I may? Please." "Mr. Moretti doesn't do anything without purpose. Whatever his reasons for accepting your proposal, they serve his interests. But that doesn't mean you can't make this situation serve yours as well." Her expression softened slightly. "You're not a prisoner here, despite appearances. You're his wife. That gives you power, if you're smart enough to use it." She left before Arya could respond, closing the door with a soft click. Arya walked to the windows and looked out at the lake. The sky was turning pink and gold, dawn breaking over water that looked almost peaceful in the early light. Somewhere out there was the city she'd known, the life she'd left behind. Her apartment with its overdue bills and broken heater. The club where she'd served drinks to people who never looked at her face. The quiet desperation of surviving without ever really living. She'd burned all of that to ashes with a single dance. The question now was, what would rise from those ashes? Sleep claimed her the moment her head hit the pillow, dragging her down into dreamless black. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows and someone was knocking on the door. Arya sat up, disoriented, her body aching from muscles she hadn't used in years. The dance had been flawless, but she was paying for it now. "Come in," she called, her voice rough with sleep. Elena entered carrying a breakfast tray. "It's 2 in the afternoon. Mr. Moretti thought you might be hungry." The food was restaurant quality. Eggs perfectly poached, toast with real butter, fresh fruit arranged like art. Arya's stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since her break at the club, a lifetime ago. "He's waiting for you in the training room when you're ready," Elena said, setting the tray on a table by the windows. Where the clothes in the closet marked training, athletic wear. Arya ate quickly, showered in a bathroom that featured heated floors and a rain shower the size of her old kitchen, then dressed in the designated clothes. Black leggings, a fitted tank top, athletic shoes that fit perfectly, despite her never having provided her size. The attention to detail was unsettling. Elena was waiting outside her door. "Follow me." The estate was a maze of corridors and staircases, all decorated with the same expensive minimalism. They passed other staff members, maids, security personnel, people whose jobs Arya couldn't begin to guess, all of whom nodded respectfully to Elena and stared at Arya with barely concealed curiosity. The training room was in the basement, accessed through a security door that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. The space beyond was pure function over form: padded floors, weight equipment, a shooting range visible through a glass partition, and enough weapons mounted on the walls to outfit a small army. Dante stood in the center of the room, wearing black tactical pants and a fitted t-shirt that revealed the kind of physique that came from practical violence rather than vanity workouts. He was talking to a woman in her 30s, compact and muscular, with short dark hair and eyes that tracked movement like a predator. "Arya," Dante said, turning as she entered. "This is Sienna Ortiz, former Marine, current head of my personal security detail. She's going to teach you how not to die." Sienna's handshake was firm enough to make Arya's bones ache. "We'll start with basics: situational awareness, threat assessment, how to break common holds. Eventually, we'll move to weapons training, But first you need to understand how to read a room. How long do I have? Arya asked. To learn everything? Sienna's smile was sharp. Years. To learn enough to maybe survive the next few weeks? We start now and don't stop. Dante moved to the edge of the room, settling into a chair with a tablet. I'll be working here. Sienna, she's all yours. The next 3 hours were the most physically demanding of Arya's life, and she'd survived ballet training. Sienna moved through scenarios with ruthless efficiency, teaching Arya how to spot exits, how to position herself in a room for maximum escape options, how to recognize the body language that preceded violence. Someone's going to grab your arm, Sienna said, demonstrating. Like this. What do you do? Pull away? Wrong. You rotate into the grab, use their leverage against them. She showed Arya the movement, then made her practice it 50 times until her shoulder burned. Again, faster. If you have to think about it, you're already dead. They moved through hold breaks, pressure points, how to use everyday objects as weapons. Sienna was patient but uncompromising, correcting Arya's form with the same precision a dance instructor would use. You have good body awareness, Sienna said during a brief water break. The dance training helps. You already know how to control your center of gravity, how to move efficiently. We're just redirecting that skill toward violence. I've never hurt anyone, Arya said quietly. You will. Sienna's expression was matter of fact. Probably soon. The question is whether you'll hesitate when the moment comes. Hesitation kills. Dante's voice carried across the room. That's enough for today. Arya, come here. Arya crossed to where he sat, every muscle screaming protest. Dante looked up from his tablet, his expression thoughtful. You did well. Better than I expected for a first session. I'm exhausted. You'll be exhausted for the next month. Your body needs to adapt. He stood, matching her height even though she was wearing athletic shoes with thick soles. Walk with me. There are things we need to discuss. They left the training room and climbed stairs to the main floor, then continued up to a third level Arya hadn't seen yet. Dante led her to a study lined with bookshelves, a massive desk dominating one wall, windows overlooking the estate's grounds. Sit, he said, gesturing to a leather chair. Arya sat, grateful to be off her feet. Dante poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter, handed her one, then settled into the chair behind his desk. You've been here less than a day, he said. I imagine you have questions. Hundreds. Start with the most important. Arya considered. There were so many things she wanted to know, but one question eclipsed all the others. Why did you really accept my proposal? Dante smiled, the expression almost approving. Good. That's the right question. He took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. I told you last night that you're a catalyst. That's true, but incomplete. The full truth is more complex. He stood and walked to the windows, his back to her, looking out at the grounds where armed guards patrolled in careful patterns. I've been building an empire for 12 years, he said quietly. Territory by territory, alliance by alliance. I inherited my father's organization when I was 22 and transformed it from a street gang into a legitimate force. We own politicians, judges, entire police precincts. We control shipping, construction, waste management, real estate. Billions of dollars flow through our accounts every year. That sounds successful. It's a prison. He turned to face her. Every move I make is calculated, predicted, countered. My enemies know my patterns because I can't afford to deviate from them. Consistency is strength in my world. Predictability equals stability. Until it becomes stagnation. Exactly. Dante's eyes gleamed with something like satisfaction. I've been locked in a stalemate with 3 rival families for years. The Calabrese family controls the north side. The Volkov organization runs the western suburbs. And the Chen syndicate owns Chinatown and most of the financial district. We've carved up Chicago between us, and we've been circling each other like wolves ever since, waiting for someone to show weakness. Arya was beginning to understand. And marrying me? Looks like weakness. Looks like I've broken my own rules. Dante Moretti, the man who never acts on impulse, who never lets sentiment interfere with business, suddenly marries a waitress on a whim? It's chaos. It's unpredictable. It's exactly the kind of instability that will make my enemies overconfident. You want them to attack. I want them to commit, to fully engage instead of this endless Cold War. He returned to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. They'll see you as my weakness. They'll try to exploit you, to use you against me. And when they do, when they finally step out of their defensive positions and make their moves, I'll destroy them. The casual way he said it, destroy them, sent ice through Arya's veins. This wasn't bravado. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. What if they kill me before you can destroy them? She asked. They won't. You'll be protected at all times. Sienna's team is the best in the country. And more importantly, I won't let it happen. His expression hardened. You're my wife now. That's not just a legal designation. In my world, it's a sacred bond. An attack on you is an attack on me, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Arya felt something else, a strange sense of security, however twisted its foundation. So I'm bait, she said. Well-protected bait, but bait nonetheless. You're an investment, and you're a person who made a choice last night, knowing the stakes. Dante's gaze didn't waver. I won't lie to you, Arya. I won't pretend this is a fairy tale, but I will honor our agreement. You're my wife for as long as this arrangement continues. You'll have access to resources you never dreamed of. Money, power, protection. All I ask in return is that you play your part. Which is what, exactly? Be visible. Be vulnerable. Let them see the waitress who won a dance, not the weapon we're forging. He smiled slightly. And learn everything Sienna teaches you, because when the violence comes, and it will come, I need you to survive it. Arya thought about his words, about the calculated ruthlessness of using her as a tactical piece in a war she barely understood. She should have been angry, should have felt used, manipulated, but she'd walked into this with open eyes. She'd made the wager knowing Dante Moretti didn't do anything without purpose. And if she was being honest with herself, being a weapon aimed at his enemies felt more alive than anything she'd experienced in years. How long? She asked. How long until they make their move? Days, maybe weeks. The news of our marriage will spread through the underworld like wildfire. They'll verify it, confirm it's real, then start planning. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then set it aside. I've already started leaking information through controlled channels. By tomorrow, every crime family in the Midwest will know that Dante Moretti married a civilian. The speculation will be intense. What will they think? That I've lost my edge, that love or lust or some other weakness has compromised my judgment. They'll see an opportunity to strike while I'm distracted. His smile turned cold. They'll be wrong. A knock on the door interrupted them. Vincent entered, the same enforcer who'd witnessed their wedding. He nodded to Arya, then addressed Dante. The Calabrese family sent a gift. It's waiting in the receiving room. Dante's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. A gift? How thoughtful. Come, Arya. You should see this. They followed Vincent through the estate to a formal receiving room decorated with antiques and art that probably cost more than Arya would earn in a lifetime. In the center of the room sat a large wooden crate, roughly 4 feet on each side. It was delivered an hour ago, Vincent said. We X-rayed it. No explosives, no weapons, just what appears to be a statue. Open it, Dante ordered. 2 security guards used crowbars to pry off the crate's lid. Inside, nestled in packing material, was indeed a statue, a marble sculpture of a dancing woman, life-sized and exquisitely crafted. The figure was frozen in mid-waltz, her dress flowing around her, her face tilted upward in an expression of pure joy. Arya felt her breath catch. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was close enough. The dancer's build, her posture, even the way she held her arms, it was clearly meant to be her. There's a card, one of the guards said, retrieving a small envelope from the packing material. Dante opened it, read the contents, then handed it to Arya without comment. The message was typed on expensive cardstock. Congratulations on your marriage. We hope your beautiful bride dances forever. All our best. The Calabrese family. They're sending a message, Arya said quietly. Several messages, actually. Dante circled the statue, examining it from all angles. First, they're confirming they know about you and have already started surveillance. This level of detail requires photographs, probably taken last night or this morning. Second, they're demonstrating resources. This sculpture was commissioned and completed in less than 24 hours, which means they have serious money and connections. Third, and most importantly, they're issuing a threat disguised as congratulations. The part about dancing forever. Exactly. A statue dances forever because it's frozen. Dead. It's elegant intimidation, the kind of move that lets them pretend innocence while making their intentions crystal clear. He smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Arya had ever seen. They just declared war. They simply don't know it yet. Vincent cleared his throat. How do you want to respond? Send them a thank you note. Gracious, appreciative. Include a photo of Arya and me with the statue, looking like newlyweds who completely missed the threat. Dante turned to Arya. Can you smile and look happily naive? I was a waitress who smiled at rude customers for tips. I can fake anything. They positioned themselves next to the statue, Dante's arm around Arya's waist in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt purely tactical. Vincent took several photos with his phone until Dante was satisfied. Perfect. Send that with the note. Let them think we're oblivious. He released Arya and addressed Vincent again. Double the perimeter guards. I want eyes on every approach to the estate, and activate all our informants. The Calabrese family just committed to a course of action. I want to know their next 3 moves before they make them. What about the statue? Vincent asked. Put it in the sculpture garden. Every time they drive past the estate, I want them to see it and remember that their little intimidation tactic failed. Dante's expression was cold calculation. Psychology is warfare, Vincent. They tried to frighten us. Instead, we'll turn their gift into a monument to their coming defeat. Over the next several days, Arya's new life took shape with a rhythm that was both grueling and strangely intoxicating. Her mornings began with Sienna in the training room. 2 hours of combat instruction that left her bruised and aching, but increasingly competent. She learned to read micro-expressions, to identify weapons concealed under clothing, to move through spaces with the kind of tactical awareness that Sienna called staying alive. Her afternoons were spent with Elena, learning the social warfare of Dante's world. Which families were allies, which were enemies, which were playing both sides. How to read a room for power dynamics. How to dress for different occasions in ways that projected either vulnerability or strength, depending on the tactical goal. Elena taught her that in this world, every gesture was a message and every outfit was armor. Evenings belonged to Dante. Sometimes they dined together in the estate's formal dining room, making small talk that gradually became real conversation. He was well-read, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a dark sense of humor that caught Arya off guard. Other times he worked in his study while she read or explored the estate's extensive library. They were learning each other's rhythms, feeling out the boundaries of this strange partnership. On the 4th night, Dante invited her to accompany him to a charity gala. It's the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser, he explained over dinner. Every major player in Chicago will be there. Legitimate business people, politicians, and about 24 criminals pretending to be legitimate business people. It's tradition. And you want me there because? Because you're my wife. Because your presence will generate exactly the kind of speculation we need. And because I'm curious to see how you handle yourself in that environment. He studied her across the table. Elena says you're a quick study. This will be your final exam. The night of the gala, Arya stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom and barely recognized herself. The dress Elena had selected was deep emerald silk that hugged her body before flowing to the floor in elegant folds. Her hair had been styled by a professional, swept up to reveal her neck and shoulders. Jewelry that probably cost more than her childhood home glittered at her throat and wrists. She looked like someone who belonged in Dante's world. The transformation was both thrilling and terrifying. Dante was waiting in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in a custom tuxedo. When he saw her descending the stairs, something flickered in his expression, appreciation maybe, or recognition that the weapon they were forging was taking shape. You look perfect, he said, offering his arm. I feel like an imposter. Good. That means you're thinking like a spy. His smile was genuine. Half the people at this gala are imposters pretending to be something they're not. You'll fit right in. The gala was held at the Palmer House Hilton, the historic hotel's grand ballroom transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Arya entered on Dante's arm, and the effect was immediate. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The news of their marriage had clearly spread, but seeing them together in person, the crime boss and the nobody waitress, created a ripple of fascinated speculation. "Smile," Dante murmured in her ear. "Look happy but slightly overwhelmed. Let them think you're a naive girl who got lucky." Arya followed his direction, projecting exactly the image he wanted. Inside, though, she was cataloging everything Sienna and Elena had taught her. Exit routes, positions of security personnel, the way certain guests clustered together, forming alliances visible to anyone who knew how to read the room. They made their way through the crowd, Dante introducing her to a carefully curated selection of people: a tech CEO who laundered money through cryptocurrency, a city councilwoman who'd been on Dante's payroll for years, a federal judge who owed his appointment to campaign contributions Dante had orchestrated. Every interaction was a performance. Arya played the role of the charming bride, asking innocent questions that made her seem harmless, while Dante conducted business through seemingly casual conversation. "Mr. Moretti, what a surprise!" The voice came from behind them, smooth as poisoned honey. Arya turned to find a man in his 50s approaching, flanked by two younger men who had bodyguard written all over them. He was handsome in a predatory way, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with eyes that assessed and dismissed her in a single glance. "Anthony," Dante said, his tone carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wouldn't miss it. Charity is so important, don't you think?" Anthony's smile never reached his eyes. "And you must be the famous bride. Arya, is it?" "I'm Anthony Calabrese." The name clicked in Arya's memory. Calabrese. The family that had sent the statue. The Northside rivals who'd just declared war disguised as congratulations. "It's lovely to meet you," Arya said, letting her voice carry just the right amount of nervous pleasure. "Dante's mentioned your family." "Has he? How kind." Anthony's attention returned to Dante. "Congratulations on your marriage. Very unexpected. Very bold." "I've always believed in seizing opportunities when they present themselves," Dante replied. "Indeed, though one does wonder about the timing, such a significant personal decision during such a delicate political moment." Anthony's smile sharpened. "I hope it doesn't prove to be a distraction. My personal life and my business are separate matters." "Are they? How modern." Anthony glanced at Arya again, and this time his gaze lingered with calculated intent. "Your wife is lovely, Dante. Fragile-looking, like porcelain. I do hope she's being careful. Chicago can be such a dangerous city for those who aren't accustomed to its rougher elements." The threat was barely veiled. Arya felt Dante's arm tense beneath her hand, though his expression remained pleasant. "Arya is tougher than she looks," Dante said quietly. "And she has very effective protection." "I'm sure she does." "Still, accidents happen. Tragic, senseless accidents." Anthony's attention shifted to someone across the room. "If you'll excuse me, I see the mayor. We should catch up soon, Dante. There's much we need to discuss about territorial arrangements." He walked away, his bodyguards trailing like sharks. "That was a threat," Arya said quietly once they were alone. "That was a declaration. He's making his position clear. You're a target, and he has no qualms about saying so in public." Dante guided her toward the bar. "How do you feel?" "Honestly? Angry." Arya was surprised by the heat in her own voice. "He looked at me like I was nothing, like I was already dead." "Good. Anger is useful if you channel it properly." Dante ordered them both champagne, then led her to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Anthony Calabrese is the most dangerous of my enemies because he's the most cautious. He doesn't make moves unless he's certain of success. Tonight, he just confirmed he's certain." "When will he strike?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but soon." Dante's expression was thoughtful. "We need to accelerate your training. Sienna wanted another 2 weeks, but we don't have that luxury anymore." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of calculated social performance. Arya met dozens of people whose names she immediately categorized into allies, enemies, and unknowns. She saw the way power moved through the room like a current, invisible to outsiders but obvious to anyone initiated into its patterns. By the time they returned to the estate, it was past midnight. Arya's feet ached from the heels, and her face hurt from smiling, but her mind was racing with everything she'd observed. "You did well tonight," Dante said as they stood in the foyer. "Better than well, actually. Several people commented on how charming you were." "I was acting." "So were they. That's what makes it effective." He loosened his tie, the first casual gesture she'd seen from him all evening. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start weapons training. After tonight, I want you armed at all times." Arya climbed the stairs to her wing, her mind too active for sleep. She changed out of the gown, washed off the makeup, and stood at the windows looking out at the dark lake. Anthony Calabresi's words echoed in her memory. Fragile looking, like porcelain. She thought about the statue sitting in the sculpture garden, frozen forever in mid-dance, a monument to what her enemies assumed she was. Delicate, breakable, already defeated. They had no idea what Dante was building, had no idea that the frightened waitress was being forged into something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. Arya smiled at her reflection in the dark glass. Let them underestimate her. Let them see porcelain and miss the steel underneath. When they finally realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The gunshot echoed through the underground range, and the paper target at the far end jerked as the bullet punched through center mass. Arya lowered the Glock 19, her hand steady despite the weapon's recoil, and waited for Sienna's assessment. "Better," Sienna said from behind her protective eyewear. "Your grouping is tighter. Do it again, but this time I want you moving. 2 shots while advancing, 2 while retreating, final 2 from cover." Arya had been on the range for 3 hours, and her arms trembled with fatigue, but she reset her stance, cleared her mind, and executed the drill exactly as instructed. The dance training helped more than she'd expected. The same muscle memory that had carried her through performances now translated into fluid movement between firing positions. When the magazine was empty, Sienna called for a break. They removed their ear protection and walked to the observation area where Dante sat reviewing security reports on his tablet. "She's ready," Sienna said without preamble. "Not expert level, but competent enough to hit what she's aiming at under stress. More importantly, she doesn't freeze anymore." Dante looked up, his gaze moving from Sienna to Arya. "You've been training for 6 days. Most people need months to reach this level." "Most people haven't had their lives threatened by a crime boss at a charity gala," Arya replied, reloading the weapon with movements that were becoming automatic. "Motivation is a powerful teacher." A smile tugged at Dante's mouth. "Fair point. Sienna, get her fitted for concealed carry. I want her armed whenever she leaves the estate." "Already ordered the holsters. They'll be here this afternoon." Sienna collected the spent shell casings with practiced efficiency. "We should also discuss the gala situation. Anthony Calabresi making open threats changes the timeline." "Agreed. Which is why we're accelerating the next phase." Dante set aside his tablet and stood. "Arya, how much do you know about your family history?" The question caught her completely off guard. "My family? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything, potentially. Your mother, what was her maiden name?" "Reeves. Catherine Reeves. Why?" Dante exchanged a look with Sienna that Arya couldn't interpret. "And her family? Where were they from?" "I don't know much." She didn't talk about her past. Arya felt a flutter of unease in her chest. She grew up in foster care, moved to Chicago when she was 18. She always said her family history didn't matter because she was building a new life. "Everyone has a history," Dante said quietly. "And in Chicago's underworld, those histories have long shadows." He pulled up something on his tablet, then turned the screen toward her. "Does this man look familiar?" The photograph showed a man in his 50s, lean and dangerous looking, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see straight through the camera. Arya studied the image, searching for recognition, and found something that made her breath catch. "He has my mother's eyes," she whispered. "The same shape, the same color. Who is he?" "Marcus Reeves. Your uncle, most likely, based on the timeline. He runs a mid-level crew on the south side, protection rackets, loan sharking, some drug distribution. Nothing major, but he's been active for 20 years. Dante's expression was carefully neutral. I didn't make the connection until after our marriage. Your mother changed her name when she left her family, cut all ties. It's why she never appeared in any background checks. Arya's mind reeled. Her mother, who'd worked double shifts as a hospital administrator to keep them fed and housed, who'd read her bedtime stories and taught her to be kind. That woman had come from a family of criminals? I need to sit down, she said. Sienna guided her to a chair while Dante continued speaking, his voice gentle but relentless. I'm telling you this because it's going to come out. If I found the connection, Anthony Calabrese will find it too. And when he does, he's going to try to use your uncle against you. How? I've never even met the man. Blood matters in this world. Marcus Reeves may be small time, but he's still family, and family can be leveraged. Dante crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself to eye level. I need to know, do you want to reach out to him first, or do we wait and see what happens? Arya thought about her mother, about the woman who'd been so determined to give her daughter a better life that she'd completely erased her own past. What would Catherine Reeves think about her daughter, marrying into the very world she'd fled? I want to meet him, Arya said, before anyone else tries to turn him into a weapon. If he's family, I should know him on my own terms. Dante nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Vincent's already made contact. Your uncle is willing to meet, but he's suspicious. He knows you married me, and he's not sure if this is some kind of trap. When? Tonight. Neutral territory, a restaurant in Bridgeport. Public enough to be safe, private enough to talk freely. He stood, offering her his hand. But before we go, there's something else you need to understand about family in this world. They left the range and walked through the estate to Dante's private study. He poured them both whiskey despite the early hour, then settled into the chair behind his desk with the weight of someone preparing to deliver difficult truths. My father built this organization from nothing, Dante began. He was brutal, effective, and completely without conscience. He taught me that family was sacred, more important than money, more binding than contracts. Everything we did was to protect and expand the family's power. He took a sip of whiskey, his gaze distant with memory. When I was 22, I discovered he'd been lying. The organization wasn't built on family loyalty. It was built on his willingness to sacrifice anyone who became inconvenient, including his own blood. He'd ordered the deaths of 2 of my cousins who'd questioned his decisions. He'd sold out his own brother to the FBI to eliminate competition. Arya felt ice slide down her spine. What did you do? I killed him. Dante's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. He'd broken the one rule that held our world together. If family isn't sacred, then nothing is. The organization would have collapsed into chaos if I'd let him continue. He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of that decision still carried in his expression. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what family means here. It's not about blood. It's about loyalty, about the bonds we choose to honor. Your uncle is blood, yes, but that doesn't automatically make him family. That designation has to be earned. And if he can't earn it, then he's just another player in the game, someone to be managed, manipulated, or, if necessary, removed. Dante's expression softened slightly, but I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. You deserve to have family beyond me in this fortress. The restaurant in Bridgeport was called the Iron Horse, a neighborhood institution that had served the same working-class clientele for 40 years. Arya arrived with Dante in one car, flanked by 2 more vehicles full of security. The precautions seemed excessive until she remembered Anthony Calabrese's threats and realized that excessive was the only way to stay alive. Marcus Reeves was already seated in a back booth when they entered, his own pair of bodyguards positioned at nearby tables. He stood as Arya approached, and she saw her mother's features reflected in his face like a ghost made flesh. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn set to the jaw. But where her mother had been warm and open, Marcus radiated controlled wariness. You look like Katie, he said quietly. She always said you were beautiful. The use of her mother's nickname, Katie, never Catherine, hit Arya like a physical blow. You stayed in touch with her? Christmas cards. Brief phone calls on birthdays. She made me promise to keep my distance, to not contaminate your life with what she called the family disease. Marcus gestured to the booth. Sit, please. We have a lot to talk about. Dante remained standing, a protective presence at Arya's shoulder. Marcus's guards tensed, but he waved them down. Relax. If Dante Moretti wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. Marcus's smile was grim. Besides, we're here to talk family, not business, isn't that right? For now, Dante agreed, sliding into the booth beside Arya. A waitress appeared, older, efficient, the kind who'd worked this job for decades and seen everything. They ordered coffee and food that none of them would eat, maintaining the illusion of a normal meal while discussing anything but normal topics. Katie never told you about us, Marcus said once the waitress had departed. About where she came from. She said her past didn't matter, that she was building something new. She was right to leave. Our father, your grandfather, he was a mean son of a bitch who thought violence solved everything. Katie was the smart one, the one who could have done something legitimate. When she got pregnant with you at 19, she saw it as her chance to escape. So she took it. Marcus's expression held old grief. I helped her disappear, new name, new identity, clean background. Cost me every favor I had, but I owed her that much. Arya's throat tightened. She never told me any of this. Because she wanted you to have choices she never had. And it worked, didn't it? You got scholarships, went to schools, had opportunities. Until she got sick. His gaze sharpened. I wanted to help with the medical bills, tried to send money. She sent it back every time, said she'd rather die broke than take dirty money. She did die broke, Arya said softly. And she left me with debt I could never repay. Which is how you ended up married to him. Marcus's attention shifted to Dante. I'll be honest. When I heard the news, I thought he'd bought you somehow, coerced you. Katie's daughter marrying the biggest crime boss in Chicago? It seemed impossible. I made the choice myself, Arya said. A stupid, reckless choice that's turned into something I didn't expect. And what's that? She thought about the question, about the past 6 days of transformation. A chance to be something other than invisible, to matter. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're more like Katie than I thought. She had that same fire underneath the kindness, that same willingness to gamble everything on a single bet. He turned to Dante. So why am I here? You didn't arrange this meeting out of sentiment. No, Dante agreed. I arranged it because Anthony Calabrese is going to discover Arya's connection to you, if he hasn't already. And when he does, he's going to try to use you against her. I'd rather establish an understanding now before that happens. An understanding. You stay neutral. You don't take money from the Calabrese family, you don't pass them information, and you don't let yourself be positioned as leverage. Dante's voice was calm but absolute. In exchange, I leave your operation alone. No territory disputes, no interference. You continue running your business exactly as you have been. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter. That's generous. Too generous. What's the real price? If it comes to war, and it will, you support our side. Not actively, just passively. You don't help my enemies, and you make sure your people know that anyone who does will answer to both of us. You're asking me to choose sides. I'm asking you to choose family, Dante corrected. Arya is your blood. I'm her husband. That makes us connected whether you like it or not. The only question is whether that connection is an asset or a liability. The food arrived, providing a temporary pause in the negotiation. Arya watched her uncle process Dante's offer, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. This was a man who'd survived 20 years in a brutal business by being smart and cautious. He wouldn't agree to anything without understanding every angle. Katie would hate this, Marcus said finally. She spent her whole life keeping you away from people like me, like us. He looked at Arya. But she's gone, and you're not a kid anymore. You made your choice. I can respect that. So you'll stay neutral, Dante pressed. I'll stay out of it. But if the Calabrese family comes at me directly, I defend myself. That's non-negotiable. Understood. But if that happens, you contact Vincent immediately. We can coordinate our response. Marcus nodded slowly, then extended his hand across the table. Dante shook it, sealing the agreement. Then Marcus turned to Arya, his expression softening. I know I'm a stranger to you, but you're Katie's daughter, and that means your family. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything that doesn't involve your husband's war, you call me. He pulled a card from his pocket, handwritten with a phone number. That's my personal line. It's always on. Arya took the card, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you. They finished the meal making awkward small talk about neutral topics. The restaurant's history, changes in the neighborhood. Safe memories of Catherine Reeves that didn't venture too close to the painful present. By the time they left, Arya felt like she'd gained something precious and fragile, a connection to her mother's hidden past that made the woman she'd loved feel more real and more complex. The ride back to the estate was quiet. Dante worked on his phone while Arya stared out the window, processing everything she'd learned. As they pulled through the security gates, he finally spoke. You handled that well. Marcus respects you. He loved my mother. That's not the same thing. No, but it's a start, and in this world, starts matter. Dante's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. Vincent, what is it? Arya couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dante's face shift from neutral to alert to coldly furious in the span of seconds. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer this time. Lock down the estate, full security protocol. Nobody in or out without my personal authorization. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Sienna, we have a situation. I need you in the security center now. What happened? Arya asked as the car pulled up to the main entrance. The Calabrese family just made their move. Not against us, against the Volkov organization. There was a massacre at one of their warehouses an hour ago. 15 dead, including 2 of Volkov's top lieutenants. Dante's eyes were hard as diamonds. Anthony is trying to eliminate his competition before coming after me. He's consolidating power. They entered the estate to find it transformed into a military operation. Armed guards patrolled every hallway. Security monitors showed every entrance, every approach, every potential vulnerability. Sienna met them in the central security room, already coordinating defensive positions with tactical precision. The Volkov organization is going to retaliate, she said without greeting, which means the city is about to turn into a war zone. We need to decide our position. We stay neutral for now, Dante said. Let them weaken each other. But I want every asset activated. I need to know everything. Troop movements, weapons acquisitions, alliance negotiations. The Calabrese family just changed the game. We need to change with it. Over the next 48 hours, Chicago's underworld erupted into open conflict. The Volkov organization struck back with devastating force, bombing 2 Calabrese-owned businesses and assassinating a city councilman who'd been on Anthony's payroll. The Calabrese family responded with a coordinated attack on Volkov's drug distribution network, seizing millions in product and killing anyone who resisted. The violence made the news, though reporters painted it as gang warfare rather than the calculated strategic conflict it actually was. Politicians called for crackdowns. Police made symbolic arrests. And beneath it all, the real players maneuvered for advantage. Arya watched it unfold from inside the fortress, training with Sienna during the day and studying reports with Dante at night. She was learning to read the conflict like a chess match, to see how each move created opportunities and vulnerabilities. Anthony is overextending, she said one evening as they reviewed the latest intelligence. He's hitting the Volkov organization hard, but he's pulling resources from other territories to do it. Look, his north side operations are running with half their normal security. Dante looked up from his tablet, surprise flickering in his expression. You're right, I didn't catch that. It's the same pattern as a dance. When you commit fully to one movement, you create imbalance. You have to leave something unprotected. Arya traced the map on the table. If someone hit his north side operations while he's focused on Volkov, they could do serious damage. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you. She met his gaze. Isn't that what you've been waiting for? The opportunity to strike while he's vulnerable? Dante stood and walked to the windows, his silhouette dark against the night sky. It's tempting, but if I move now, I become part of the open war. Right now, I'm still the neutral party, the one who hasn't committed. That position has value. For how long? Eventually you'll have to choose. I know, but timing is everything in war. Strike too early and you waste the advantage. Strike too late and the opportunity passes. He turned back to face her. There's something else you should know. We intercepted communications between Anthony Calabrese and someone in the Chen syndicate. They're negotiating an alliance. Arya's stomach dropped. If the Calabrese and Chen families unite, they'd control 70% of Chicago. The Volkov organization would be destroyed. I'd be isolated, and my smaller allies would abandon me rather than face that kind of power. Dante's expression was grim. Anthony is smarter than I gave him credit for. This war with Volkov isn't his endgame. It's a demonstration for the Chen family, proof that he can eliminate threats efficiently. Once they're convinced of his strength, they'll formalize the alliance and come after me together. How long do we have? Days? Maybe a week? The negotiations are already in final stages. A knock on the study door interrupted them. Vincent entered, his face pale. We have a problem. Marcus Reeves was just grabbed by the Calabrese family. Witnesses saw him being forced into a van outside his apartment an hour ago. Arya felt the world tilt. They took my uncle? It's a message, Dante said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Anthony knows about your connection to Marcus. He's using your uncle as bait, trying to force our hand. We have to get him back. That's what Anthony wants. He expects us to rush in to make mistakes out of emotion. The moment we try to rescue Marcus, we'll be walking into a trap. Dante's jaw clenched. We need to be smart about this. How smart can we be when my uncle is being tortured somewhere? Arya's voice rose despite her attempt at control. You said family was sacred in this world. Was that a lie? It wasn't a lie. But sacred doesn't mean suicidal. Dante moved to his desk and pulled up surveillance feeds. We find out where they're holding him. We assess the tactical situation, and then we plan a rescue that doesn't get everyone killed. Arya wanted to scream at him, to demand immediate action, but she forced herself to think, to use the strategic mind she'd been developing. Dante was right. Rushing in blindly would get Marcus killed and probably her too. They needed information first. Can we negotiate? She asked. Trade something for his release? We could, but the price will be high. And even if we pay it, Anthony might kill Marcus anyway, just to prove he can. Dante's fingers flew across his tablet. I'm activating every intelligence asset we have. Someone will know where they took him. The next 6 hours were agony. Reports came in from across the city. Possible locations, rumored sightings, contradictory intelligence that had to be verified and cross-checked. Arya paced the security center while Dante coordinated the search with the focused intensity of a general at war. Finally, at 3 a.m, Vincent burst into the room with confirmation. We found him. Calabrese is holding Marcus in a warehouse on Goose Island. It's heavily guarded. At least 20 men, probably more. They're not trying to hide it. They want us to know where he is. Because it's a trap, Sienna said. They'll have snipers positioned, multiple ambush points. Their betting will come in hard and fast. Then we don't give them what they expect. Dante turned to Arya. How badly do you want to save your uncle? What kind of question is that? An honest one. Because if we do this, we're committing to open war. There's no going back after tonight. The neutrality I've been maintaining disappears the moment we hit that warehouse. His gaze was intense. So I need to know, is Marcus Reeves worth everything that follows? Arya thought about her mother, about the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give her daughter a better life. She thought about Marcus, who'd helped Catherine escape and had honored her wishes for 26 years despite the cost to himself. She thought about the concept of family that Dante had described, bonds chosen and honored, sacred above all else. Yes, she said, he's worth it. Dante nodded once, decision made. Then we go to war. The planning took 2 hours. Dante spread blueprints of the Goose Island warehouse across the conference table, while Sienna marked security positions based on thermal imaging from their surveillance drones. Vincent coordinated with their allies, calling in favors and activating sleeper assets that had been waiting years for this exact moment. And Arya sat in the corner, methodically checking and rechecking the Glock that would be her constant companion for whatever came next. 3 entry points, Sienna said, tracing routes on the blueprint with a red marker. Front entrance is obvious suicide. They'll have it locked down with overlapping fields of fire. The loading dock on the east side is less defended but still a kill zone, which leaves the roof access. They'll expect us to use the roof, Dante countered. It's too obvious. so we make them think we're using the roof while we actually come through the river access. Vincent pointed to a notation on the blueprint that showed a drainage tunnel leading from the Chicago River into the warehouse's basement. It's old infrastructure, probably hasn't been used in decades. They might not even know it exists. Dante studied the route, his expression calculating. Tight quarters, no room to maneuver if we encounter resistance. But it gets us inside without exposing our approach. He looked at Sienna. Can your team clear the tunnel fast enough? If it's clear, yes. If they've posted guards, it becomes a bottleneck where we're exposed and vulnerable. Sienna's expression was grim. It's a risk. Everything about this is a risk. Dante turned to Arya. You're staying here. No, I'm not. Arya, this isn't a training exercise. This is a combat operation against a fortified position with superior numbers. You've been training for less than 2 weeks. And whose fault is that? Arya stood, her voice hard. You're the one who married me, knowing I'd become a target. You're the one who said family was sacred. Marcus is my blood, and I'm not sitting in this fortress while other people risk their lives to save him. Dante's jaw clenched. If something happens to you, then you'll have to live with it, just like I'll have to live with it if I stay here safe while my uncle dies in that warehouse. She moved to stand directly in front of him. I'm going, Dante. You can waste time arguing, or you can use that time to figure out how to keep me alive. The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. Everyone in the room watched the standoff between them, waiting to see who would break first. Sienna cleared her throat. If she's coming, she needs body armor and a dedicated protection detail. I can assign Carlo and 2 others to shadow her movements. Body armor won't stop a headshot, Dante said quietly, but Arya could hear the resignation in his voice. He'd already lost this argument and knew it. Then I'll keep my head down. Arya returned to her seat, effectively ending the discussion. What's the plan? Dante stared at her for another long moment, then turned back to the blueprints with the air of a man accepting the inevitable. We split into 3 teams. Sienna leads the primary assault through the drainage tunnel with 8 operators. Vincent takes a secondary team to the roof as a diversion. Make noise, draw their attention, but don't commit to full engagement. I'll lead a 3rd team through the loading dock once the other 2 teams have pulled the defenders out of position. And me? Arya asked. You're with my team. You stay behind me at all times. You follow orders without question. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. The rest of the planning was tactical detail, timing, communications, fallback positions, extraction routes. They would move in 90 minutes, hitting the warehouse at dawn when defenders would be at their most fatigued. It was a narrow window, but it was all they had. Arya changed into tactical gear that Sienna had prepared: black cargo pants, reinforced jacket, body armor that felt like wearing a lead blanket. The Glock sat in a hip holster, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. She checked her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 2 weeks ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was armored for war. Elena appeared in the doorway, her expression more emotional than Arya had ever seen it. Be careful, the older woman said quietly. Mr. Moretti needs you more than he knows. I'll do my best to come back in one piece. See that you do. Elena pressed something into Arya's hand, a small pendant on a silver chain, some kind of religious medallion. My grandmother gave this to me during the war. It's kept me safe through worse situations than this. Arya wanted to refuse, to explain that she didn't believe in such things, but the gesture was too genuine to dismiss. She fastened the chain around her neck, letting the pendant rest beneath her armor. Thank you, Elena. The convoy assembled in the underground garage. 6 vehicles, 23 people, enough weapons to start a small war. Dante moved among the teams with quiet efficiency, checking equipment and reviewing assignments. When he reached Arya, his expression was unreadable. Last chance to stay behind. Not taking it, he nodded, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. Stay alive, he whispered against her ear. Everything else is negotiable. Then he was moving again, all business, the moment of vulnerability locked away behind tactical necessity. They drove through pre-dawn Chicago in formation, the city still mostly asleep, unaware that violence was about to erupt in its industrial heart. Arya sat in the 3rd vehicle with Dante, Carlo, and two other guards whose names she'd learned during training. Nobody spoke. The tension was thick enough to taste. Goose Island rose from the Chicago River like an industrial ghost, all abandoned warehouses and rusting machinery. The Target building sat on the northern edge, a 3-story concrete structure that had once housed a printing company. Now it was just another piece of urban decay repurposed for criminal enterprise. The convoy split at predetermined points. Sienna's team peeled off toward the river access. Vincent's team headed for a building 2 blocks away that would give them roof access. Dante's team parked 3 streets over and approached on foot, using early morning shadows for concealment. Radio silence until the operation began. They moved through the empty streets like ghosts, every sense alert for signs of ambush. Carlo led point with the kind of relaxed readiness that came from years of combat experience. Arya stayed in the middle of the formation, her hand resting on the Glock, heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. They reached the staging position, an alley with direct line of sight to the loading dock. Dante checked his watch, counted down silently with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sienna's voice crackled through their earpieces. Primary team entering drainage tunnel, encountering standing water but no resistance, proceeding to basement access. 30 seconds later, Vincent's team announced their position. Secondary team on roof. We have visual on 6 guards at street level. Estimate at least 10 more inside the building. Preparing diversion. Stand by, Dante ordered. Wait for primary team to get in position. The next minute stretched like hours. Arya watched the loading dock, saw 2 guards smoking cigarettes near the entrance, completely unaware that their world was about to explode. She wondered if Marcus was still alive, if they were already too late, if this entire operation was just revenge disguised as rescue. Primary team in position, Sienna reported. Basement is clear. We're stacked on the stairwell door. Ready, on your mark. Dante's voice was calm as death. Execute. Everything happened at once. Vincent's team opened fire from the rooftop, not to kill, but to create chaos. The guards at street level scattered, shouting into radios, trying to coordinate a response to an attack from an unexpected direction. More guards poured out of the warehouse, focusing on the roof threat, which left the loading dock temporarily undermanned. Move, Dante ordered. They sprinted across the open ground, weapons ready, every second an eternity of exposure. One of the remaining guards spotted them and raised his weapon, but Carlo put 2 rounds in his chest before he could fire. The other guard dove for cover, fumbling with his radio. Dante reached him first, a suppressed pistol appearing in his hand with magician's speed. 2 quiet shots, and the guard collapsed without making a sound. They were inside. The loading dock opened into a distribution area filled with crates and machinery. Empty now, but bloodstains on the concrete floor told stories of previous violence. Dante's team moved through the space in tactical formation, clearing corners, watching for ambush. Sienna's voice came through the radio. Primary team engaging second floor, moderate resistance. We're pushing through. Gunfire echoed from above, short, controlled bursts mixed with shouted commands and screams. The battle had begun in earnest. Dante led them to a stairwell, Carlo taking point with his rifle raised. They climbed quickly, but carefully, each landing a potential kill zone. At the second floor, they encountered their first real resistance. 3 guards came around the corner at full sprint, fleeing from Sienna's advancing team. They saw Dante's group and opened fire without hesitation. Bullets sparked off metal railings and punched through drywall. Arya dropped to a crouch behind a support column, her training taking over despite the terror flooding her system. Carlo and the other guards returned fire with devastating efficiency. 2 of the enemy went down immediately. The third tried to retreat but caught a bullet in the leg and collapsed, screaming. Dante approached the wounded man and asked a single question. "Where's Marcus Reeves?" The guard spat blood. "3rd floor, north side. But you're too late. Anthony's already there." Dante shot him without ceremony and kept moving. "3rd floor, double time." They climbed the final stairwell and emerged into a corridor that had been converted into makeshift offices. More gunfire ahead. Sienna's team was engaged with the main defensive force, buying them time to reach Marcus. The north side office was at the end of the hallway, its door reinforced with steel plates, locked from the inside. "Breaching charge," Dante ordered. One of his men placed a small explosive on the hinges while everyone else took cover. The detonation was sharp and brutal, blowing the door off its frame and sending it crashing inward. Dante went through first, weapon raised, and Arya followed despite every instinct screaming at her to stay back. The office had been converted into an interrogation room. Marcus Reeves sat bound to a chair in the center, his face bloody and swollen, one eye nearly shut from bruising. But he was alive, conscious, and when he saw Arya, his expression twisted with horror. "No," he croaked. "You shouldn't be here. It's a trap." Movement from the shadows. Anthony Calabrese stepped into view with 4 guards, all armed, all with weapons already trained on Dante's team. The crime boss wore an expensive suit that looked absurdly formal in the industrial surroundings, and his smile was pure satisfaction. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," Anthony said pleasantly, "though I expected Dante to be smart enough to leave his bride at home. This is a pleasant surprise." Dante's weapon was still raised, but so were a dozen others. A standoff, perfectly balanced on the edge of slaughter. "Let Marcus go," Dante said quietly. "This is between you and me." "No, Dante, this is about demonstrating consequences. You married a civilian and brought her into our world. That was a statement of weakness, whether you intended it or not. And weakness must be punished, or it spreads like disease." Anthony's gaze shifted to Arya. "Tell me, Mrs. Moretti, do you regret that dance yet?" Arya's hand tightened on her weapon. Every lesson Sienna had taught her crystallized in this moment. Threat assessment, firing lanes, the calculation of acceptable risk. She was outgunned, but not outmaneuvered. Not yet. "The only thing I regret," she said clearly, "is not shooting you at the charity gala when I had the chance." Anthony laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. "Spirit, I can see why Dante married you. Such a waste that you'll both die here." "You can't kill us without starting a war you can't win," Dante said. "My allies will come for you. The Chen Syndicate won't formalize an alliance with someone that unstable. The Chen Syndicate doesn't care about stability. They care about strength, and I'm about to demonstrate mine very clearly." Anthony pulled out his phone with his free hand, tapped the screen, then showed them the display. It was a live video feed of Dante's estate. The perspective was from one of the perimeter cameras, showing the security walls and front gates. "You see, while you've been focused on rescuing dear Marcus, I've been positioning assets. Right now, I have 30 men surrounding your fortress. In exactly 2 minutes, they're going to breach those gates and kill everyone inside. Your staff, your guards, everyone loyal to you. By the time you get back, if you survive this, you'll have nothing left to rule." Arya saw Dante's expression change, saw the calculation running behind his eyes. He was trapped between 2 impossible choices: stay and fight Anthony while his people died, or abandon the rescue and race back to defend the estate. The radio crackled in Arya's ear. Vincent's voice, urgent and strained. "We're pinned down on the roof. They've got reinforcements moving in. We need extraction now." Sienna responded immediately. "Primary team is engaged on 2nd floor. We can't pull back without taking casualties." Everything was collapsing. The trap was springing shut from multiple directions, and there was no clean way out. Dante lowered his weapon slowly. "If I surrender," he said to Anthony, "do you let my people at the estate live?" "Dante, no!" Arya started, but he silenced her with a look. Anthony's smile widened. "Surrender? Now that's unexpected. But yes, I could be persuaded to call off the attack in exchange for your unconditional surrender. You, personally, submit to my authority, publicly, in front of witnesses. And my wife, my uncle? Collateral. They stay with me until I'm certain you'll honor the agreement. Then maybe, eventually, they're released." It was a death sentence disguised as mercy. Anthony would never release them. This was about humiliation followed by execution, about destroying Dante so completely that no one would dare challenge the Calabrese family again. Arya's mind raced. She thought about Sienna's training, about reading rooms and recognizing opportunities. She thought about dance, about balance and timing, and the moment when commitment to one movement created vulnerability elsewhere. And she saw it. Anthony's attention was focused entirely on Dante. His guards were watching the main threats, Dante's men, the doorway, potential angles of attack. But they'd dismissed Arya as irrelevant, A civilian playing at soldier, no real danger. They'd made the same mistake everyone made. They saw what they expected to see. Arya's hand moved with the precision of a dancer executing a practice sequence. The Glock cleared the holster smoothly. Her arm extended in the two-handed grip Sienna had drilled into her muscle memory. Her finger found the trigger, and she shot Anthony Calabrese in the chest. The room erupted into chaos. Anthony staggered backward, shock replacing satisfaction on his face. His guards opened fire, but Dante's team was already moving, using the moment of surprise to gain advantage. Arya dropped behind Marcus's chair, using it as cover, and fired twice more at the nearest guard. The confined space became a storm of violence. Muzzle flashes lit the room like lightning. Bullets tore through walls and furniture. Someone was screaming, maybe Marcus, maybe one of the guards, maybe her own voice lost in the thunder. Dante moved through the chaos with lethal efficiency, dropping 2 guards in rapid succession before tackling Anthony to the ground. The crime boss was still alive despite Arya's shot. Body armor, she realized, the same precaution Dante had insisted on for her, but he was winded and vulnerable. Carlo reached Marcus and cut his restraints with a knife that appeared from nowhere. "Can you walk?" "Barely," Marcus gasped, but he forced himself upright. One of Anthony's remaining guards leveled his weapon at Dante's back. Arya saw it happening as if in slow motion, saw the trajectory, saw the moment before death. She fired without thinking. The bullet caught the guard in the shoulder, spinning him around, his shot going wild. Carlo finished him with a precise burst that put the man down permanently. Suddenly, it was over. Anthony's guards were dead or incapacitated. Dante stood over the Calabrese boss with a gun pressed to his forehead. And Arya was still alive, her weapon raised, her hands shaking with adrenaline, but her grip steady. "Your phone," Dante demanded. "Call off the attack on my estate. Now." Anthony laughed through pain, blood staining his teeth. "Or what? You'll kill me? That starts a war. You can't—" Dante shot him in the kneecap. The scream was immediate and piercing. "I'll ask once more. Call off the attack." Anthony fumbled for his phone with shaking hands and made the call. Arya couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she saw the moment the crime boss gave the order to withdraw. "Done," Anthony gasped. "They're pulling back." "Verify it," Dante ordered Carlo, who immediately got on the radio with the estate's security. The next 60 seconds felt like an eternity. Finally, Carlo nodded. "Confirmed. The assault force is withdrawing. The estate is secure." Dante looked down at Anthony Calabrese, and his expression was colder than Arya had ever seen it. "You made a mistake tonight. Several, actually. First, you underestimated my wife. Second, you assumed I wouldn't sacrifice everything to protect my people. Third, and most fatally, you showed me exactly how ruthless you're willing to be." He raised his voice slightly. "Sienna, status report. Second floor is clear. We're mopping up stragglers. Vincent's team is extracting from the roof. No friendly casualties." "Excellent. Prepare for full withdrawal. We're leaving in 3 minutes." Dante turned to Arya. "Are you hurt?" She did a quick mental inventory. Her ears were ringing from the gunfire, her heart was racing, and she was pretty sure she'd have nightmares for months, but she wasn't bleeding. "I'm okay." "You shot him." Dante's expression held something like pride. "Center mass, perfect form. Sienna will be impressed." "He was going to kill you." "Yes, he was, and you saved my life." He pulled out a phone, not his regular device, but a burner, and made a call. "It's done. Move to Phase 2. Arya wanted to ask what Phase 2 meant, but there wasn't time. Dante's team was already moving Marcus toward the exit, supporting the injured man between them. Dante grabbed Anthony by the collar and hauled him upright despite his wounded knee. "You're coming with us," Dante said. "There are some people who want to meet you." They extracted from the warehouse in controlled chaos. Sienna's team provided cover, while Vincent's team secured the vehicles. The sun was rising over Chicago, painting the industrial landscape in shades of gold and red that looked like fire. Marcus was loaded into one vehicle. Anthony was thrown into another, bound and guarded. Arya climbed into Dante's SUV on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, the adrenaline starting to fade and leave trembling exhaustion in its wake. As they pulled away from Goose Island, Dante made another call on the burner phone. 30 minutes. The old rail yard. Bring everyone. He ended the call and turned to Arya. I need you to trust me. What happens next is going to look extreme, but it's necessary. Can you do that? Arya thought about the violence she'd just participated in, about the man she'd shot, about how completely her life had transformed. Extreme was relative at this point. Yes, the old rail yard on the south side had been abandoned for decades, a sprawling graveyard of rusting trains and decaying infrastructure. Dante's convoy pulled into the center of the complex just as dawn fully broke, and Arya saw that they weren't alone. At least 50 people were gathered in the yard, crime bosses, lieutenants, soldiers. She recognized some faces from the charity gala, others from the intelligence reports she'd been studying. These were the players, the power brokers, the ones who really ran Chicago's underworld. And standing at the front of the gathered crowd was an elegant woman in her 60s, flanked by bodyguards who moved with the precision of trained killers. She wore a tailored suit and jade jewelry, and her expression was one of calm authority. That's Margaret Chen, Dante murmured, head of the Chen Syndicate, the one Anthony was trying to form an alliance with. They exited the vehicles. Anthony was dragged out and forced to his knees in front of the assembled crowd. Blood from his wounded knee pooled on the concrete. Margaret Chen stepped forward, her gaze moving from Anthony to Dante to Arya with calculating interest. Mr. Moretti, you requested this assembly with some urgency. I trust you have good reason. I do, Dante's voice carried across the rail yard. Anthony Calabrese has been operating under the assumption that chaos serves his interests. He started a war with the Volkov organization. He attempted to negotiate an alliance with your syndicate while simultaneously attacking my people. And tonight, he tried to massacre my entire household staff to demonstrate his strength. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Arya saw the calculation in her eyes. Those are serious accusations, Margaret said. And all completely true, Dante replied. But I'm not here to seek justice or revenge. I'm here to propose a different solution, a permanent one. He gestured, and Vincent stepped forward with a briefcase. Inside were documents, contracts, financial records, territorial agreements. Dante had been planning this for weeks, Arya realized. Maybe longer. The rescue operation, the confrontation with Anthony, all of it had been leading to this moment. I'm proposing a consolidation, Dante said. The Calabrese territories are absorbed into a joint administration between my organization and the Chen Syndicate. The Volkov organization, weakened by recent attacks, accepts tributary status or faces complete elimination, and Chicago's underworld operates under a new framework: one council, 3 equal voices, binding agreements. It was audacious. It was practically impossible. And from the expressions on the assembled faces, it was exactly what half of them had been hoping someone would suggest. Margaret Chen studied the documents, then looked at Anthony with cold disdain. You were negotiating with me, she said to him, promising strength and stability. Yet here you are, defeated by a man you claimed was weak, kneeling in the dirt because you couldn't even protect yourself from a single well-planned operation. Her gaze shifted to Arya. And I understand your wife was the one who shot you. A civilian with 2 weeks of training. How embarrassing. Anthony's face twisted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over. My family. Your family will fall in line or be destroyed. Margaret cut him off. Those are the only options now. She looked at Dante. I accept your proposal. On one condition. Name it. He dies here, today, in front of everyone. That's the price for peace, his blood to wash away the chaos he created. The rail yard went silent. Anthony's eyes widened with genuine fear for the first time. The assembled crime bosses waited to see what Dante would do. This was the test, Arya realized. Margaret was evaluating whether Dante had the ruthlessness to do what was necessary. If he hesitated, if he showed mercy, the alliance would crumble before it formed. Dante drew his weapon smoothly and pressed it against Anthony's temple. Any last words? Anthony looked up at him with hate burning in his eyes. Your wife. She's the weakness that will destroy you. Remember that when they come for her next. They won't. Dante's voice was certain as death. Because she's not a weakness. She's the strongest person I know. He pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the rail yard like a pronouncement from fate itself. Anthony Calabrese collapsed to the concrete, dead before he hit the ground. Blood spread in a dark pool that reflected the morning sun like a terrible mirror. Margaret Chen nodded once, satisfied. Then we have an accord. The next hour was a strange combination of brutal pragmatism and bureaucratic detail. Territories were divided, agreements were signed. The Volkov organization's representative, a scarred man named Dmitri, who'd somehow survived the recent purges, accepted tributary status with visible relief. The old order was dead, literally lying in a pool of blood at their feet. The new order was being built on its corpse. Arya stood beside Dante throughout it all, her weapons still holstered, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened. She'd shot a man, watched her husband execute another, participated in the violent reshaping of an entire city's criminal underworld, and she felt alive, more alive than she had in years. It was horrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When the assembly finally dispersed, Dante walked her back to their vehicle. Marcus had already been transported to a private medical facility where his injuries would be treated quietly. The sun was fully up now, the city awakening to a day that would seem normal to civilians, even though everything had fundamentally changed. "Are you okay?" Dante asked quietly. Arya thought about the question. Was she okay? She'd just survived a firefight, killed in defense of her husband, and witnessed an execution that would reshape Chicago's underworld for generations. Okay seemed like an inadequate description. "I will be," she said finally. "Eventually. You saved my life tonight. Twice. Once when you shot Anthony, and once when you insisted on coming despite the danger. If you'd stayed behind, I would have walked into that trap without the element of surprise you provided." His expression softened. "Thank you. We're married," Arya said simply. "That means we protect each other. You told me that was sacred." "It is. And you've proven you understand what that means." He opened the vehicle door for her. "Let's go home." The drive back to the estate was quiet. Arya watched Chicago pass by the windows, seeing it differently now. She knew its secrets. She'd participated in its hidden violence. She'd helped shape its future. 2 weeks ago, she'd been invisible. Today, she'd shot a crime boss and walked away from a massacre. The transformation was so complete that she barely recognized herself. But as the estate's security gates came into view, and she saw Elena waiting on the steps with relief written across her face, Arya realized something important. She hadn't just survived the violence. She'd found something worth fighting for, a chosen family, a purpose, a place where she mattered. The dance that had started all of this felt like a lifetime ago. That frightened waitress making a desperate wager was gone, burned away in the crucible of the past 2 weeks. In her place stood someone stronger, someone dangerous, someone who'd learned that power wasn't just about physical strength. It was about will, about the willingness to do what was necessary when everything hung in the balance. Dante had married her as a tactical move, a catalyst to force his enemies into action. But somewhere along the way, the transaction had become something else, something real. She looked at him as they exited the vehicle, saw the exhaustion and satisfaction warring in his expression. He'd won his war, consolidated his power, built an empire that would last, and she'd helped him do it. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "We both need rest. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Tomorrow. The word held promise and threat in equal measure. But Arya found she wasn't afraid of it anymore. She'd danced with death and survived. Everything else was just choreography. Sleep came hard and left too soon. Arya woke in the late afternoon to find Dante already gone from the estate, pulled into the endless meetings and negotiations that followed any major power shift. Elena brought her lunch on a tray and reported that Marcus was stable, recovering well under the care of Dante's private physicians, and asking to see her when she felt ready. She wasn't ready. Not yet. The events of the previous night played on repeat in her mind. The gunfire, the blood, Anthony's expression as Dante's bullet ended him. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of it sat heavy in her chest. But there was no time for processing trauma. The world kept moving whether she was ready or not. Sienna found her in the training room that evening, going through combat drills with mechanical precision. The repetition helped quiet her mind, gave her something to focus on besides the memory of pulling the trigger. "You did well yesterday," Sienna said from the doorway. "Better than well. You acted under pressure, made the right tactical decision, and saved lives. That's not something everyone can do." Arya lowered her weapon and turned to face her instructor. "I killed someone. Maybe. The body armor might have... You shot a man who was about to murder your husband. Whether he survived the body armor or died from Dante's execution doesn't change the fact that your actions were justified." Sienna's expression was firm, but not unkind. "This is the world you chose, Arya. Violence isn't an aberration here. It's the language we speak. The sooner you accept that, the easier it becomes." "Does it get easier? The taking of lives?" "No, it gets familiar. There's a difference." Sienna moved to the equipment rack and selected a knife. "But you can learn to carry it, to make peace with the necessary brutality. That's what separates survivors from casualties in this business." They trained for another hour, Sienna teaching her close-quarters knife work that was less about skill and more about savage efficiency. By the time Dante returned to the estate near midnight, Arya was exhausted enough that the nightmares might leave her alone for one night. He found her in the library, curled into a leather chair with a book she wasn't really reading. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded somewhere, and he looked as tired as she felt. "How are you holding up?" he asked, pouring them both whiskey from the bar cart. "I don't know yet. Ask me in a week." She accepted the glass. "How are the negotiations going?" "Better than expected. Margaret Chen is ruthlessly practical, which makes her an ideal partner. The Volkov organization is falling in line without resistance, and the smaller players are scrambling to pledge loyalty to the new council." He settled into the chair across from her. "We're rebuilding an entire power structure in real time. It's chaos, but it's productive chaos." "And the Calabrese territories?" "Being absorbed as planned. Anthony's lieutenants are either joining us or being quietly removed. By the end of the month, his family's legacy will be completely erased." Dante took a sip of whiskey, his expression thoughtful. "We won, Arya. Against odds that should have destroyed us, we won." She heard the disbelief beneath his words. This wasn't a man accustomed to uncertainty, but the victory had clearly surprised him with its completeness. "You planned for this," she said. "The alliance with Chen, the consolidation. You were always going to force this confrontation." "I planned for the possibility, but plans are just theoretical constructs until someone executes them. And execution requires people willing to do what's necessary." His gaze was intense. "You were the catalyst I needed. Not because you were weak or vulnerable, but because you were brave enough to walk into this world and become something it had never seen before." "What's that?" "A civilian who chose this life with open eyes, who learned the rules and then played the game better than people who'd been born into it." He leaned forward. "Anthony was right about one thing. You are my weakness. But he was wrong about why. You're not a weakness because you're fragile. You're a weakness because I care whether you survive. And that caring makes me vulnerable in ways I've never been before." Arya felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of truth spoken aloud for the first time. "I care whether you survive too," she said quietly. "That wasn't part of the original wager." "No, it wasn't." Dante's smile was soft, almost sad. "We made a transaction, a dance for a marriage, strategy disguised as impulse. But somewhere along the way, it became real." They sat in silence for a long moment, the admission hanging between them like a confession. Then Dante stood and offered his hand. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her through the estate to a wing she'd never explored, past security checkpoints and coded doors, until they reached what appeared to be a private archive. The room was climate-controlled, lined with filing cabinets and safes, containing what Arya assumed were the most sensitive documents of Dante's empire. He opened a particular safe and removed a leather portfolio, then spread its contents on the table. Photographs, dozens of them, spanning decades. A young man who looked like Dante standing beside an older version of himself. Family portraits. Candid shots of celebrations and ordinary moments. "My father," Dante said, pointing to the older man. "Marco Moretti. These are the only photos I kept after I killed him. The only evidence that he was ever anything more than a monster." Arya studied the images, seeing glimpses of the man Dante had described. Charming in some shots, cold in others, the duality captured in frozen moments. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand something about the choice I made. My father believed that family was sacred, but he practiced that belief selectively. He protected the people who served his interests and destroyed those who didn't, regardless of blood. When I killed him, I wasn't just removing a threat. I was making a statement about what family actually means. He gathered the photos back into the portfolio with careful precision. Family isn't blood. It's not biology or accident of birth. It's the people you choose to protect, the bonds you honor even when it costs you everything. Dante closed the safe and turned to face her fully. You've become family to me, Arya, not because of a legal contract or a tactical arrangement, but because you've proven yourself worthy of that designation in every way that matters. The words should have felt overwhelming, but instead they settled over Arya like recognition of something she'd already known. The transaction had become real. The strategy had become love. So what happens now? She asked. Now we build something permanent, an empire that operates by rules instead of chaos, a structure that protects people instead of exploiting them. His expression turned thoughtful. And we make a choice about what kind of leaders we want to be. Over the next 3 weeks, that choice took concrete form. The new council, Dante, Margaret Chen, and a representative from the now subordinate Volkov organization, began implementing reforms that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Protection rackets were restructured to actually provide protection instead of just extorting money. Drug territories were consolidated and regulated to minimize violence and civilian casualties. Legitimate businesses were expanded to provide employment and cover for operations that remain necessarily criminal. It wasn't clean. It would never be clean. But it was better than the chaos that had preceded it, and that was enough to justify the effort. Arya found her role evolving alongside the organization. She became Dante's eyes and ears in places he couldn't go, her civilian background making her invisible in contexts where known criminals would be spotted immediately. She attended charity functions and social gatherings, gathering intelligence while projecting the image of a naive bride still learning her husband's world. But behind that facade, she was becoming something else entirely. Sienna's training continued, expanding into advanced tactics and strategic thinking. Elena taught her the social warfare of elite society, how to read power dynamics and exploit weaknesses. And Dante himself mentored her in the art of leadership, showing her how to command respect through competence rather than fear. Marcus became a regular presence at the estate once he recovered from his injuries. The relationship between uncle and niece was tentative at first, both of them navigating the strange territory of found family. But gradually they built something genuine, sharing stories about Catherine Reeves that helped Arya understand the woman her mother had been before desperation had forced her into hiding. She would have been proud of you, Marcus said one evening over dinner at the estate. Katie always believed you were destined for something extraordinary, though I doubt she imagined this particular path. Would she have been horrified? Arya asked. Probably, but she also would have understood. Katie fled this world, but she never forgot how it worked. She knew that survival sometimes requires compromise. Marcus smiled sadly. And she knew that strength comes in many forms. You found yours. That's what matters. The nightmares came less frequently as time passed, though they never disappeared entirely. Arya learned to carry the weight of what she'd done, to accept that the violence was a permanent part of her now. Sienna was right. It didn't get easier, but it became familiar. She learned to live with it. 6 weeks after the confrontation at the warehouse, Dante announced plans for a gala celebrating the grand reopening of the Velvet Cage. The underground club had been closed during the recent violence, but now it would return as the flagship venue of their new empire, neutral ground where all factions could gather under rules of absolute peace. I want you to plan it, Dante told Arya. Every detail. This is your opportunity to make a statement about who we are and what we've built. Arya threw herself into the project with an intensity that surprised even her. She worked with Elena to curate the guest list, balancing political necessity with strategic messaging. She collaborated with designers to transform the club into something that honored its history while signaling the new order. and she coordinated with Sienna to ensure security was ironclad without being obviously oppressive. The night of the reopening arrived with the weight of importance. This wasn't just a party. It was a coronation, a declaration that the chaos had ended and a new era had begun. Arya dressed with care, choosing a gown of midnight blue silk that Elena had commissioned from a designer in Milan. Her jewelry was simple but expensive, diamond earrings that had belonged to Dante's grandmother, a gesture that spoke of legacy and acceptance. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that left her neck and shoulders bare, and when she studied herself in the mirror, she saw someone who belonged in this world. The frightened waitress was gone completely. In her place stood a queen. Dante waited for her at the bottom of the grand staircase, devastating in a custom tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a classic film. When he saw her descending, his expression shifted to something Arya had rarely seen from him, unguarded appreciation mixed with something deeper. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "We're beautiful," she corrected, taking his arm. "Together." The drive to the velvet cage felt like traveling backward through time. Arya remembered the last time she'd made this journey, frightened, exhausted, invisible. Now she arrived as one half of the power couple that controlled Chicago's underworld, and the difference was dizzying. The club had been transformed. The marble floors gleamed under new lighting that made the space feel both intimate and grand. The crystal chandeliers had been cleaned and restored until they blazed like stars. And at the center of it all, the small dance floor where everything had begun waited like a stage set for the evening's performance. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of old power and new ambition. Margaret Chen arrived with her usual elegance, flanking herself with bodyguards who moved like dancers themselves. Dmitri from the Volkov organization brought his new lieutenants, all of them displaying the subdued confidence of people who'd survived a purge and emerged loyal to the new order. Legitimate business people and politicians mixed with criminals, the lines between legal and illegal blurred to invisibility. And standing near the bar looking uncomfortable in formal wear was Marcus Reeves with two of his crew members. He caught Arya's eye and raised his glass in a subtle salute. Family. Chosen and honored. Dante moved through the crowd with practiced ease, conducting business disguised as celebration. Arya stayed at his side initially, then gradually separated to conduct her own conversations, her own intelligence gathering. She was learning to read the currents of power, to understand how decisions were made in the spaces between words. "Mrs. Moretti, you've done something remarkable with this space." Arya turned to find Margaret Chen beside her, the older woman's expression one of genuine approval. "Thank you. I wanted to honor what it was while making it something new." A metaphor for the entire organization. Margaret's smile was knowing. "You're more than decorative, despite what some people assumed. I can see why Dante values you. The feeling is mutual. He's taught me a great deal. And you've taught him something even more valuable, that strength and sentiment aren't mutually exclusive. The old guard believed you had to sacrifice one for the other. You've proven that false." Margaret's gaze was sharp. "That's going to change everything, you know. The example you set." Before Arya could respond, the orchestra that had been playing background music shifted to a new piece. The opening notes of Strauss's Blue Danube filled the club, and conversation faltered as people recognized the significance. Dante appeared at Arya's elbow, his hand extended in invitation. "Dance with me," he said quietly, "like you did that first night. But this time, we danced together." The crowd parted as they walked to the center of the floor. Every eye in the club turned to watch, recognizing this moment for what it was. A statement, a symbol, a completion of the circle that had begun with a reckless wager. Arya placed her hand in Dante's and felt the rightness of it settle to her bones. This was different from the solo performance that had changed her life. This was partnership, synchronization, two people moving as one. They began with the traditional waltz frame, Dante leading with confidence, and Arya following with the trained precision of her years of study. But as the music built, they started incorporating elements that went beyond tradition. Arya executed a spin that Dante caught perfectly, their timing so precise it looked rehearsed despite being completely improvised. He lifted her in a moment that shouldn't have worked in formal wear, but somehow did, her gown flowing around them like water. They moved across the marble floor with the kind of chemistry that couldn't be faked or performed. This wasn't just dance, it was conversation, negotiation, love expressed through movement. Every step was a declaration. We survived. We built this together. We're unbreakable. The watching crowd faded away. The club disappeared. There was only the music, the movement, and the man whose arms held her steady while giving her freedom to fly. As the final notes played, Dante pulled Aria close for the closing pose, her back arched in a dramatic dip, their faces inches apart. The position should have felt vulnerable, but instead it felt like power shared between equals. The club erupted into applause, but Aria barely heard it. She was looking into Dante's eyes and seeing her future reflected there. Dangerous, complicated, absolutely worth fighting for. He pulled her upright and into a kiss that was tender and fierce in equal measure, a promise sealed in front of witnesses who understood exactly what it meant. When they finally broke apart, Dante kept her hand in his and addressed the assembled crowd. 2 months ago, I made a wager with a woman I didn't know. She danced flawlessly and won a marriage. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't even realize myself, was that I was the one who'd won. His voice carried across the silent club. Chicago is entering a new era, one built on agreements instead of chaos, on structure instead of endless war. But more importantly, it's an era that understands family isn't about blood or territory. It's about the bonds we choose to honor. He looked at Aria, and she saw everything they'd survived together reflected in his expression. This woman taught me that strength comes in forms I'd never considered. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That love and power can coexist if you're brave enough to build something that honors both. Dante raised his glass. To new beginnings, to chosen family, and to the woman who danced her way into my life and changed everything. The toast was echoed throughout the club, glasses rising in salute. Aria felt the weight of their attention, the recognition that she'd earned her place through actions rather than accident. She was no longer the waitress who'd gotten lucky. She was Aria Moretti, partner to one of the most powerful men in Chicago, architect of the evening's success, someone who mattered. The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversation and careful celebration. Deals were made in quiet corners. Alliances were reinforced through shared drinks and subtle gestures. And through it all, Aria moved with confidence that would have been unthinkable 2 months earlier. Near midnight, she found herself back at the bar, where she'd once served drinks to people who never saw her face. The current bartender, a young man who looked as nervous as she'd once felt, mixed her a cocktail with shaking hands. "Mrs. Moretti," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I heard what you did, how you started here. It gives people like me hope, that we can become something more." Aria looked at him and saw herself reflected in his uncertainty and ambition. She thought about all the invisible people grinding through days that felt meaningless, dreaming of transformation, but lacking the catalyst to make it real. "You can," she told him, "but understand that becoming more means accepting risk. It means being willing to gamble everything on a single moment and living with the consequences, whatever they are." She smiled gently. "Not everyone is built for that, and that's okay. There's honor in the quiet life too. But you chose the risk." "I did, and it cost me everything I was to become what I am now. Some days I'm still not sure if that was wisdom or madness." She picked up her drink. "But I'm here. I survived, and I matter. That's enough." She returned to the main floor to find Dante in conversation with several politicians whose campaigns he'd funded. He caught her eye across the room and excused himself, moving through the crowd to reach her with single-minded focus. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Home. The word resonated with warmth and belonging. The fortress on the lake that had seemed like a prison now felt like sanctuary, a place they'd built together through survival and choice. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They made their exits with the kind of efficient grace that came from practice, thanking key guests and delegating the rest to subordinates. As their convoy pulled away from the club, Aria looked back at the entrance where she'd once arrived, terrified and desperate. So much had changed. She'd been forged in violence, educated in strategy, transformed by necessity and choice into something her former self wouldn't recognize. The journey had cost her innocence, peace of mind, and the comfortable fiction that she could live an ordinary life. But it had given her power, purpose, partnership with someone who saw her clearly and valued her completely. A place in a world that rewarded strength and punished weakness, where she'd learned to be strong enough to survive. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Dante worked on his phone while Arya watched the city pass by the windows. Chicago looked the same as it always had. Millions of lights, endless streets, the lake stretching dark and vast beyond the shore. But she knew its secrets now. Knew where the power lived and how it moved. Knew that beneath the surface of normalcy, complex systems of violence and commerce shaped every moment. At the estate, Elena was waiting with warm towels and congratulations on the evening's success. Sienna reported that security had been flawless, no incidents or concerns. Vincent confirmed that the political objectives of the evening had been achieved. Alliances reinforced, messages delivered, dominance established. Everything had gone perfectly. The new order was secure. Arya climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd gradually moved from the east wing into Dante's private quarters, their relationship evolving from tactical alliance to genuine partnership. She changed out of the formal gown and into comfortable clothes, washed off the makeup, and stood at the windows looking out at the dark water. Dante joined her there, having shed his own formal wear for casual comfort. They stood together in silence, watching the moon paint silver paths across Lake Michigan. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "The dance? The wager? Everything that followed?" Arya thought about the question seriously, examining her transformation from every angle. The violence she'd participated in, the lives that had ended because of decisions she'd helped make, the permanent loss of the innocent person she'd been. "No," she said finally. "I regret what it cost. I regret the nightmares and the weight of what I've done. But I don't regret choosing this, choosing you, choosing to matter. You always mattered. You just couldn't see it yet. Maybe, but I can see it now. And that's worth everything it took to get here." Dante pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other while the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new tests of the empire they'd built together. But tonight, they had this. Peace earned through survival, love forged in violence, partnership that had proven itself unbreakable. In the distance, Chicago glittered like a promise and a threat in equal measure. The city they'd claimed, the world they'd conquered, the life they'd built from a single reckless moment when a frightened waitress had danced for her future and won far more than she'd bargained for. Arya closed her eyes and let herself feel the completeness of this moment. She'd started as nothing, invisible and powerless. She'd gambled everything on 3 minutes of flawless movement, and she'd become a queen standing beside her king, ruling an empire built on blood and strategy and the bonds they'd chosen to honor above all else. The waltz that had changed her life was over, but the music still played in her memory, a reminder of where she'd come from and how far she'd traveled. She would carry that music forever, the rhythm of transformation, the melody of survival, the harmony of two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary from the ashes of the old world. Outside, the city slept. Inside the fortress, plans were already forming for tomorrow's battles. And in the space between those two realities, Arya Moretti stood with her husband and felt the weight of power settle across her shoulders like a crown. She'd danced alone once, proving herself worthy of survival. Now she danced with a partner who matched her step for step, their movements synchronized by something deeper than music. This was her life now. Dangerous, powerful, absolutely hers. And she wouldn't change a single step of the dance that had brought her here.